I've never believed in the paranormal, ghosts, spirits, all that stuff. Just superstitions people use to scare themselves. That's what I thought until I ended up in the hospital after a bad fall. The hospital was old, built in the 1940s. It had been renovated over the years, but there were parts of it that still had that eerie, outdated feel. You know the kind. Dim hallways, flickering lights, and that cold, sterile smell that never goes away. I was placed in a small room at the end of one of those hallways recovering from surgery. The first night was uneventful, just the usual sounds of nurses coming and going, the soft beeps of machines. But the second night, that's when things got strange. It was around 3 a.m. when I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside my room. At first, I didn't think much of it, probably just a nurse. But the footsteps didn't stop. They kept going, back and forth, pacing slowly outside my door. I glanced at the clock. It was 3:17 a.m., too late for regular rounds. I sat up, listening more carefully. The pacing continued for a few minutes, and then I heard a door creak open. But the thing is, my room was at the end of the hallway. There were no other doors around me. I got up and peeked through the small window in the door, expecting to see someone, but the hallway was empty. Empty, except for one thing, a door at the very end of the hall, a door that wasn't there before. There was no number on it, no sign of what it was. Just a plain old wooden door, slightly ajar. My heart started pounding, but I couldn't stop myself. I had to see what was behind that door. I stepped into the hallway, the cold tile floor chilling my bare feet. The door creaked as I pushed it open. Inside, the room was pitch black, but I could make out the faint outline of a hospital bed in the center. And then I heard it. A voice, soft at first, like a whisper, but it grew louder until I could make out the words. "Help me." I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The voice came again, pleading, desperate. "Please, help me!" I turned to run, but my feet wouldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, staring into the darkness as the voice grew louder, more insistent. And then, from the shadows, I saw it. A figure lying on the bed, reaching out toward me with bony, withered fingers. I don't know how I managed to move, but I bolted back to my room, slamming the door shut behind me. I called for the nurse, my hands shaking, but when she came, the door at the end of the hall was gone. Just vanished. I spent the rest of the night sitting up in bed, too afraid to close my eyes. The next morning, I asked the nurse about the door, but she just gave me a strange look. "There's no door there," she said. "There never has been." I checked out of the hospital that day, but sometimes late at night I still hear those footsteps pacing outside my door. And every time I wonder if that door is still there, waiting for someone else to find it. Hospitals are supposed to be places of healing, but after what I experienced during my stay at Northvale Medical Center, I'll never feel safe in one again. I was admitted for a simple procedure, an appendectomy, nothing serious. But after the surgery, things took a turn for the worse. I developed an infection and had to stay in the hospital longer than expected. That's when I was moved to room 303, a small windowless room at the back of the ward. The first few nights were uneventful, but on the fourth night, things started to get strange. It was around midnight when I woke up to the sound of someone crying. At first, I thought it was coming from the room next to mine, but as I listened more carefully, I realized it was coming from my room. The crying was soft, barely audible, but it was there, somewhere in the darkness. I turned on the light, but there was no one there. Just me, lying in bed, listening to this faint, heart-wrenching sobbing. I called the nurse, but when she came in, the crying stopped. She checked the room, but of course she didn't find anything. I tried to convince myself it was just a side effect of the pain medication and went back to sleep. But the next night, it happened again. This time, the crying was louder, more desperate. I could hear the voice, faint but clear, repeating the same words over and over. "Don't leave me. Please don't leave me." It felt like someone was in the room with me, someone invisible, but very real. I was too scared to move, too scared to call the nurse. I just lay there, paralyzed with fear, listening to the sobbing. The next morning, I asked one of the older nurses about the room. She hesitated, then told me something that still chills me to the bone. Years ago, a patient had been left in room 303 for weeks without proper care. The staff had forgotten about her, and by the time they found her, she was barely alive. She died alone, neglected, crying out for help that never came. The nurse assured me that the crying I heard was just a coincidence, that there were no such things as ghosts. But after that, I couldn't stay in the room any longer. I was moved to a different ward, but I'll never forget the sound of that voice. Pleading, begging, as if she were still there, waiting for someone to come and save her. I've heard people talk about hospitals being haunted, but I always thought it was just nonsense. That is, until I ended up in St. Vincent's Hospital after a routine surgery. Everything was fine at first. My recovery was going smoothly, and the nurses were friendly. But on the third night, something happened that I still can't explain. It was around 1 a.m. when I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside my door. They were soft, almost hesitant, like someone was pacing back and forth in the hallway. At first I thought it was one of the nurses, but the footsteps didn't stop. They just kept going, back and forth for what felt like hours. I tried to ignore it, but after a while, curiosity got the better of me. I got out of bed and opened the door, expecting to see someone, but the hallway was empty. The footsteps had stopped. I went back to bed, but as soon as I closed my eyes, the footsteps started again. This time, they were closer, right outside my door. I opened the door again, but once more the hallway was empty. I mentioned it to the nurse the next morning, and she gave me a strange look. "You're in room 508, right?" she asked. I nodded. She hesitated before speaking again. "That room. There's a story about it. Years ago, there was a nurse who worked the night shift. She was dedicated, always staying late to check on her patients. But one night, she had a heart attack while making her rounds. They found her body the next morning, lying just outside room 508. I laughed nervously, thinking she was just trying to scare me, but her expression remained serious. Some say she still walks the halls at night, checking on her patients. That night, I tried to sleep, but the footsteps returned. This time, they didn't stop. They got closer and closer until they were right next to my bed. I could feel the presence of someone standing there, watching me. But when I opened my eyes, no one was there. The next morning, I asked to be discharged early. I couldn't stay there another night. Even now, I can still hear those footsteps in my dreams, always pacing, always getting closer. And every time I wonder if she's still there, making her rounds, checking on the patients she never got to help.